The champagne spill spread across the marble floor of Sterling Enterprises' executive lobby like liquid gold
Excuse
under
me,
the
is this
crystal
area dry?
chandeliers.
Yes, ma'am. Just finished.
Marcus
It's all
Blake
yours.
pushed his
Thank
mop
you.
through
Have
it
a good
in
night.
slow, practiced arcs,
We need to act now.
watching
The
the
market won't
bubbles
wait.
dissolve
But
into
the risks are
dirty
significant.
water.
We need more data.
We move
50
now
feet
or we
away,
lose.
through the floor-to-ceiling glass doors of the main ballroom, his wife laughed at something a board member whispered in her ear. She wore midnight blue silk that cost more than most people made in a month. He wore coveralls with his name stitched over the pocket in fading thread. The gala was everything Victoria had worked toward for the past 3 years. Titan Holdings had finally agreed to consider Sterling's partnership proposal, and tonight she was networking with every influential player in Manhattan's private equity world. The room glittered with ambition, dressed as celebration. Marcus could see her touching elbows, leaning in to hear over the string quartet. Her posture perfect in the way she'd practiced after Eleanor Crawford took her under wing. That was when things changed. When Victoria stopped seeing herself as a girl from Pennsylvania who'd clawed her way through state college and started seeing herself as someone who belonged in rooms like this. Someone who didn't belong with men who mopped floors. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out with his free hand, angling the screen away from the security cameras. The email preview made something cold settle in his chest. From Titan Holdings, Board of Directors. Subject, Sterling Enterprises Proposal. Final review required. Mr. Blake, we need your approval on Sterling's 4th submission. They've increased their equity offer to 35%. Board recommends rejection based on previous analysis, but given the aggressive courting, we wanted your final word before the Monday deadline. He deleted it without opening the full message. Monday. The day Victoria had circled on their kitchen calendar in red marker, adding 3 exclamation points. The day she believed her life would transform. She had no idea the decision sat in the pocket of the man currently cleaning up after her celebration. The glass doors swung open. Eleanor Crawford stepped out, her silver hair swept into a style that probably required an hour and a professional. She spotted Marcus immediately, and her expression shifted from practiced warmth to something harder. Her heels clicked against marble as she approached, each step deliberate. Eleanor's voice carried the kind of authority that came from never being questioned. The help shouldn't be gawking through the glass. It makes the guests uncomfortable. Marcus kept his eyes down, years of practice making the posture automatic. Just doing my job, ma'am. Spill happened out here. Well, do it somewhere else. The string of you people hovering around like you're owed something. She turned, then paused, glancing back with distaste. And tell whoever manages facilities that we need better quality staff for events like this. First impressions matter. The doors closed behind her, muting the quartet back to a distant hum. Marcus returned to mopping, but his jaw was tight enough to ache. Miguel, one of the other maintenance workers, approached with a rolling trash bin, shaking his head. Man, your wife doesn't even acknowledge you anymore. Miguel kept his voice low, sympathetic. 5 years you've been married, and she acts like you're invisible. Marcus wrung out the mop, watching dirty water spiral down the drain. She's under a lot of pressure. The Titan Holdings deal is everything to her right now. The Titan deal. Miguel laughed without humor. I heard the kitchen staff talking. Sterling's proposal got rejected 3 times already. They're desperate. Eleanor's been telling Victoria that landing this partnership is the difference between making CEO and staying VP forever. 3 rejections. Marcus had personally red-flagged each proposal. The first was all flash and no substance. The second inflated projections that wouldn't survive a quarter of real market pressure. The third tried to leverage relationships that didn't exist, name-dropping board members who'd never heard of Sterling Enterprises. Each time, he'd watched Victoria work herself to exhaustion on documents that were dead on arrival. Each time, He'd wanted to tell her the truth. Each time, he'd stayed silent, telling himself he needed to know if she loved him or the idea of what he could give her. Through the glass, he watched her now. She stood in a circle of men in expensive suits, her smile bright and practiced. Richard Hawthorne stood closest, leaning in too close, his hand resting on the small of her back in a way that made Marcus's knuckles white around the mop handle. Richard was a vice president at Hawthorne Industries, a mid-tier manufacturing firm that had been circling Sterling for months. Eleanor had introduced them 6 weeks ago at another gala. Since then, Richard had become a fixture in Victoria's calendar. Late dinners, strategy sessions, networking events where spouses weren't invited. The ballroom doors opened again. This time, Victoria herself stepped out, scrolling through her phone, her forehead creased in concentration. She didn't look up until she nearly collided with Marcus. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. The shift happened in less than a second. Recognition, embarrassment, irritation. "Marcus, what are you doing out here?" "Cleaning up a spill, Victoria. It's my job." "Well, can you do it somewhere else? I'm trying to make connections tonight, and having my—" She stopped, glancing back at the ballroom as if checking whether anyone had followed her out. When she looked at him again, her voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "Just stay out of sight, okay? Eleanor already mentioned seeing you hanging around." Something in his chest cracked. Not broke, not yet, but the fracture spread a little wider. "Hanging around? I work here, Victoria. I've worked here for 2 years. I know that. She pressed her fingers to her temples, the gesture she always made when stress built behind her eyes. "Tonight is important. Titan's executive team is in there. If I can make the right impression, if I can show them Sterling is worth the investment, maybe they're not looking for the right impression. Maybe they want substance." Her jaw tightened. "And what would you know about what Titan Holdings wants? You mop their floors, Marcus." "You don't sit in boardrooms. You don't understand how these things work." The words landed like physical blows. He forced his voice to stay level, calm, the tone he'd used for 5 years whenever she started to drift away from him. "You're right. I don't understand. But I know you, Victoria. I remember when you didn't care about impressing people, when you cared about building something real." "Real doesn't close deals. Real doesn't pay for—" She stopped again, shaking her head. "I don't have time for this. Richard is introducing me to someone from Titan's advisory board. I need to get back." Richard. Marcus tasted the name like poison. He's been very attentive lately. Victoria's expression shifted to something defensive. "He's been helpful. Unlike some people, he understands what I'm trying to build. He has connections I need." "What about what we built? Does that matter anymore?" For a moment, just a heartbeat, something soft flickered across her face. The girl he'd married, the one who'd cried in his arms after her father lost his factory job, who'd sworn she'd never let money turn her into the kind of person who forgot where she came from. Then Eleanor's laugh cut through the glass doors, and the softness vanished. "We'll talk at home. Late. I have to stay until the end." She turned, then paused. "And Marcus? Use the service elevator when you leave. The front entrance? It doesn't look right." She disappeared back into the ballroom before he could respond. Through the glass, he watched Richard's hand find her waist again, watched her lean into the touch with a smile that used to be reserved for quiet Sunday mornings in their apartment, the apartment they'd shared since the beginning, before the promotions and the galas and the slow, grinding erosion of everything they'd promised each other. Miguel had witnessed the whole exchange. He didn't say anything, just squeezed Marcus's shoulder and went back to his cleaning. Marcus stood there for a long moment, mop in hand, water cooling in the bucket. Then he pulled out his phone and typed a message he'd been composing in his head for months. To Daniel Shaw, from Marcus Blake. We need to talk. Tomorrow morning, my office. The response came within seconds. From Daniel Shaw, to Marcus Blake. Rough night? Marcus typed back. It's time. He finished his shift at midnight, long after the gala wound down and the last guests filtered out through the lobby he'd mopped until it gleamed. Victoria would stay later, networking over the remnants of the open bar, laughing at jokes that weren't funny and pretending she'd been born into this world instead of fighting her way into it. He rode the service elevator down to the basement parking level, where his pickup truck sat in the corner reserved for maintenance staff. The same truck he'd driven since college, back when Victoria thought his refusal to buy something flashier was charming instead of embarrassing. The drive home took 20 minutes through Manhattan's late-night streets. Home was a 2-bedroom apartment in a middle-class neighborhood, rent-controlled and modest. Victoria complained about it constantly now, comparing it to Eleanor's penthouse and Richard's brownstone in terms that made it clear she saw it as temporary, a stepping stone to something better, somewhere she wouldn't have to explain why her husband was a janitor. He parked 3 blocks away from the building, cutting the engine in an alley that backed up to a warehouse district. The Mercedes waited in the shadows, sleek and black, its windows tinted dark enough to be mirrors. Daniel Shaw sat in the driver's seat, reading something on a tablet. He looked up when Marcus approached, his expression carefully neutral. Evening, boss. Daniel's voice carried the flat affect of someone who'd spent years in military intelligence, trained to give nothing away. Bad night? Marcus climbed into the back seat, the leather cool and expensive against his skin. The contrast with his coveralls was absurd, but he'd stopped caring about absurdity months ago. She told me to use the service elevator, said it didn't look right for me to leave through the front entrance. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He'd worked for Marcus for 7 years, hired when Titan Holdings was still small enough to run from a repurposed warehouse office. He'd seen the marriage from the outside, watched it slowly corrode under pressure Marcus had partially created by maintaining the fiction of being just a janitor. Finally, he said what he always said. Your call. I know. Marcus leaned back, closing his eyes. Monday. She thinks Titan is going to approve her proposal Monday. She's been preparing for weeks. Eleanor convinced her that this deal is the difference between making CEO and being stuck at VP. It's not. Sterling's fundamentals are weak, and Victoria's strategy relies too much on borrowed credibility. We both know that. Daniel shifted in his seat. Are you going to tell her? Before Monday? No. The word came out harder than Marcus intended. She made her choice tonight. She chose the image over the reality. She chose Richard's connections over our marriage. I'm done testing. I'm done waiting for her to see me. So what's the play? Marcus pulled his phone out, opening a file he'd been building for months. Contingency plans, legal strategies, financial projections. Protocol Reckoning. The name felt melodramatic when he'd first created it, but now it seemed appropriate. An accounting. A reckoning for years of being treated like he wasn't enough. Monday morning, Victoria has a meeting scheduled at Titan Holdings. 10 a.m., executive boardroom, to finalize the divorce settlement. Daniel's eyebrow rose. The divorce isn't final. You haven't even filed yet. I will, tomorrow. She's going to come home tonight, probably after 2 in the morning, and she's going to tell me we need to talk. She's going to say she's outgrown me, that she needs a partner who operates at her level, that she's met someone who understands her ambitions. Marcus opened his eyes, staring at the back of Daniel's headrest. Richard Hawthorne has been positioning himself as that someone for weeks. Eleanor's been encouraging it. Victoria's been letting it happen. You sure about this? Once you trigger protocol reckoning, there's no walking it back. Her company, her reputation, her relationship with Richard, it all comes down. I'm sure. Marcus had never been more certain of anything in his life. She wanted a transaction. She wanted to trade up, find a husband who fits the image she's trying to build. I'm going to show her what real transactions look like when you're playing in a league you don't understand. Daniel nodded slowly, then tapped something on his tablet. I'll have the legal team ready. Arthur's already drafted the preliminary documents. We'll need your signature on the hostile acquisition papers for Sterling, but we can do that Sunday. Gives us time to position everything before Monday's reveal. And the meeting room at Titan? Already reserved, executive boardroom on the 52nd floor. I told scheduling it was for a sensitive personnel matter. Daniel's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. They won't ask questions. Marcus climbed out of the Mercedes, back into the October cold. Daniel lowered the window as the engine started. Boss, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I know you loved her. I still do. The admission hurt worse than anything Victoria had said tonight. That's why this is going to hurt so much. The Mercedes pulled away, disappearing into the late-night traffic. Marcus walked the 3 blocks back to his truck, then drove the final distance home. The apartment was dark and empty, the way it had been most nights for the past year. He sat in the living room without turning on the lights, waiting. She came home at 3:15 in the morning. He heard her heels on the hardwood floor of the hallway, heard her fumbling with keys, heard the soft curse when she nearly tripped over the threshold. The apartment smelled like expensive perfume and champagne. She froze when she saw him sitting on the couch. Marcus, you scared me. Why are you sitting in the dark? He didn't turn on the lamp. Waiting for you. How is the rest of the gala? Good. Really good, actually. I made some important connections. She set her clutch on the entry table, her movements careful in the way people moved when they were slightly drunk and trying to hide it. Richard introduced me to someone from Titan's advisory board. He thinks we have a real shot at approval. That's great. Richard seems very invested in your success. Victoria's spine stiffened. She could hear the edge in his voice, the thing he was trying not to say. He's been a good friend, a good networking contact. Is that what he is? A friend? The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they'd been avoiding for months. Finally, Victoria crossed to the couch, sitting on the far end, as far from him as the cushions allowed. She didn't look at him when she spoke. We need to talk. There it was, the phrase that ended relationships, the beginning of the conversation he'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Marcus felt something inside him go very still, very cold. The part that had hoped, that had waited, that had believed she might choose him in the end. That part finally died. I'm listening. Victoria twisted her hands together, the nervous gesture she'd never quite outgrown. These past few months, I've been doing a lot of thinking. About my career, about where I'm going, about what I need to get there. And I don't think we want the same things anymore, Marcus. When we got married, we were both just starting out. We were both struggling, both trying to make ends meet. We had that in common. But I've grown. My career has grown. And you... She finally looked at him, her eyes bright with tears she wouldn't let fall. You're still mopping floors, Marcus. You're still exactly where you were 5 years ago. I have a job. I work hard. I thought that's what mattered. It's not enough. Not for where I'm trying to go. Eleanor says, Eleanor. The name came out flat, bitter. What does Eleanor say? She says I need a partner who operates at my level, someone who understands the world I'm moving into, someone who can help me build the kind of life I've been working toward. Someone like Richard Hawthorne. Victoria's expression shifted to something defensive, guilty, defiant. Richard understands what I'm trying to do. He doesn't make me feel bad for wanting more. He doesn't act like my ambition is something to apologize for. I never asked you to apologize for ambition. I asked you not to forget who you are, who we are, who we were. Past tense. She stood up, pacing to the window, her arms wrapped around herself. I've changed, Marcus. I can't be the girl who is happy in a rent-controlled apartment anymore. I can't be satisfied with cheap dinners and budget vacations and making do. I want more. I deserve more. And I can't give you more. No, you can't. You're a janitor. You're always going to be a janitor, and I'm going to be CEO of a company that partners with Titan Holdings. Do you understand how that looks? Do you understand what people say when I tell them my husband mops floors? Marcus stood slowly, crossing to where she stood by the window. Manhattan stretched out below them, all lights and possibility, the city that never slept, the city that ate people alive if they lost sight of what mattered. What do they say, Victoria? They say I could do better. They say I'm holding myself back. They say... Her voice broke, and for a moment she sounded like the girl he'd married, the one who'd cried in a coffee shop when her last dollar went to rent instead of food. Then she straightened, and the moment passed. They say I need to make a choice. My career or my marriage. And I'm choosing my career. Just like that. 5 years, and you're choosing a title over what we built. We didn't build anything, Marcus. I built a career. You stayed exactly where you were. I can't carry you anymore. The words should have hurt more than they did. Maybe he'd been preparing for them too long, letting the scar tissue build until nothing could cut deep enough to bleed. I see. So what now? Victoria pulled an envelope from her clutch, the movement practiced, rehearsed. Eleanor's influence again, choreographing even the dissolution of his marriage. I had my lawyer drop divorce papers. I'm being fair. You get $25,000 from our joint savings, and you can keep your truck. I keep the apartment, my retirement accounts, and my stock in sterling. Marcus took the envelope, feeling its weight. Light, insignificant, the ending of a marriage reduced to legal documents and splitting assets. $25,000. That's what 5 years is worth. It's generous for someone with your limited prospects. The cruelty in her voice was new, borrowed from Eleanor's playbook. Victoria had never been cruel before, just distant. Cruel meant Eleanor had been coaching her, preparing her for this conversation. You should be grateful I'm giving you anything. And the apartment? The one we both paid rent on for 3 years before your promotion? I've been paying the majority for the past 2 years. It's mine. You can find something in your price range, maybe a studio in Queens, somewhere more appropriate. More appropriate? Like he was the problem, the thing that didn't fit in the life she was building. Marcus opened the envelope, scanning the papers inside. Standard divorce settlement, no fault, clean break. She'd thought of everything, or Eleanor had. The division of assets, the timeline, the terms that made it clear he was being dismissed with the minimum legally required. His phone buzzed. Daniel, right on schedule. From Daniel Shaw to Marcus Blake. Papers ready for signature. We'll execute Monday morning as discussed. Everything's in place. Marcus slipped the phone back into his pocket. Victoria watched him, her jaw set, waiting for him to fight, to beg, to make this harder than it needed to be. He wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. "I have one condition." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "You're not in a position to make conditions." 1. The final divorce meeting, where we sign the papers and make this official. I want it at Titan Holdings headquarters, Monday morning, 10 o'clock. Titan? Why would we meet there? My lawyer's office is perfectly... I have a contact there, someone who owes me a favor. They're letting me use a conference room. It's neutral ground, and it's the only place I'll agree to sign. Victoria crossed her arms, suspicion clear in her posture. What contact? How do you know anyone at Titan Holdings? I do maintenance work there sometimes. One of their facilities managers is a friend. He's letting me use the space so I don't have to pay for a lawyer's office. It's free, Victoria. I thought you'd appreciate me saving money. The explanation was just plausible enough, just pathetic enough, that she believed it. Marcus could see the moment she decided he was telling the truth, see the pity and contempt mix in her expression. Poor Marcus, using connections from his janitorial work to save a few $100s on office space. Fine, Monday morning, 10 o'clock, Titan Holdings. I'll be there. Eleanor and Richard will probably come as witnesses. Richard has business there anyway, some meeting with Titan's executive team about a potential partnership between our companies. Of course he does. Marcus set the envelope on the coffee table, unsigned. I'll see you Monday then. For the official end. Victoria grabbed her phone and clutch, heading toward the bedroom. She paused in the doorway, looking back at him one last time. For what it's worth, Marcus, I did love you. When we started. But people grow apart. It happens. Yeah, it happens. She disappeared into the bedroom, closing the door behind her. Marcus heard drawers opening, the sound of her packing an overnight bag. Going to a hotel, probably. Or maybe to Richard's brownstone, though she'd have the sense to wait a few days before making that obvious. He sat back down on the couch, pulling out his phone. To Daniel Shaw. From Marcus Blake. She took the bait. Monday, 10 a.m., Titan Holdings. She thinks it's just a divorce signing. She's bringing Eleanor and Richard as witnesses. They're expecting to walk into a conference room and walk out with a clean break. From Daniel Shaw to Marcus Blake. And instead, to Daniel Shaw from Marcus Blake. Instead, she's going to learn who she married and what it costs to trade down. Marcus sat in the dark apartment for another hour, listening to Victoria move around in the bedroom. Finally, the door opened and she emerged with a suitcase. She didn't look at him as she headed for the front door. I'll be at the Four Seasons until Monday. After we sign, I'll come back for the rest of my things. The door closed behind her. Marcus sat in the silence, feeling the weight of the empty apartment. 5 years of marriage ended in a 3-hour conversation and a suitcase of clothes. He should feel something. Anger, grief, relief. Instead, he just felt tired. His phone buzzed again. From Daniel Shaw to Marcus Blake. You still there, boss? Marcus smiled without humor. To Daniel Shaw. From Marcus Blake. Yeah, I'm here. Let's make sure Monday morning is one she'll never forget. Saturday morning broke cold and gray over Manhattan. Marcus woke in the empty apartment, the bed still made on Victoria's side, her absence a physical thing. He'd slept on the couch, unwilling to face their bedroom alone. His phone showed 3 missed calls from Miguel, 2 from his father's old friend who'd helped him into the maintenance position at Sterling, and 1 from a number he didn't recognize. He ignored them all. Instead, he dressed in jeans and a worn sweatshirt, the civilian clothes that felt more real than the coveralls or the tailored suits hanging in his real closet across town. He drove his truck through Saturday morning traffic, heading toward the warehouse district where Titan Holdings had started 7 years ago. The building still stood, converted now into luxury lofts, but he remembered when it was just empty space and borrowed furniture. When it was him and Daniel and a laptop, building something from nothing, while the world assumed he was exactly what he appeared to be. The real Titan Holdings headquarters occupied 40 floors of a glass tower in Midtown. Marcus parked in the executive garage, using the keycard that granted him access to spaces Victoria would never see. The elevator recognized his fingerprint, taking him straight to the 52nd floor without stops. Saturday meant skeleton staff, just security and a few workaholics. Nobody who would question why the supposed janitor was walking into the chairman's office. Daniel waited inside, tablet in hand, the wall screens already displaying financial data and legal documents. Arthur Pendleton sat at the conference table, Marcus's lawyer and one of the most feared corporate attorneys in New York. He'd sued Fortune 500 companies and won. He'd negotiated deals that made front-page news, and he'd kept Marcus Blake's true identity secret for 7 years, never once slipping even when the temptation must have been enormous. Arthur stood when Marcus entered, extending a hand. "Marcus, I'm sorry it's come to this." "So am I." Marcus shook, then moved to the windows overlooking the city. Saturday morning traffic flowed below, thousands of people starting their weekends, unaware that in this room, 3 men were preparing to destroy a company and a woman who'd made the mistake of treating one of them like he didn't matter. Daniel pulled up the first file. Sterling Enterprises, current valuation, $1.2 billion. Victoria's been CEO for 8 months, VP of Strategic Development for 2 years before that. Under her leadership, revenue's up 18%, but profit margins are down 6%. She's been expanding too fast, trying to show growth without understanding the fundamentals. "Eleanor's strategy," Marcus said. "Grow fast, look impressive, worry about sustainability later. It works until it doesn't." Arthur tapped the table, bringing up another screen. "We've been acquiring Sterling stock through shell companies for the past 6 months. As of close of business Friday, Titan Holdings and associated entities own 58%, controlling interest. The board doesn't know yet. The SEC filings won't be public until Monday morning. And when they are? Chaos. Sterling stock will spike on speculation that Titan's making a move. Victoria's going to walk into that boardroom thinking she's signing divorce papers and walking out to approve a partnership that will make her career. Instead, she finds out her ex-husband owns her company. Marcus turned from the window. "What about Richard Hawthorne?" Daniel's smile was grim. "Hawthorne Industries is in worse shape than Sterling. $47 million in debt, revenue declining 30% year over year. Creditors filing lawsuits. Richard's been using Victoria to get access to Titan. He thinks if he can position himself as her romantic partner, we'll approve Sterling's proposal to save his connected girlfriend's company. Then he'll push for a merger, use Sterling's assets to bail out Hawthorne, and walk away rich while both companies collapse. Does Victoria know? Not a chance. Richard's been playing her like a violin. Eleanor either doesn't know or doesn't care. She just wants Victoria attached to someone who looks successful, regardless of the reality." Marcus moved to the table, looking at Richard's file. Photos from society pages, business profiles, financials that painted a clear picture of a man desperately trying to maintain an image he could no longer afford. "And Eleanor?" Arthur pulled up a new file. "Eleanor Crawford, chairwoman of Sterling's board, 22 years with the company. She's been manipulating board votes through intimidation and false reporting. Nothing criminal, just aggressive politics, but she's been positioning herself as kingmaker, and Victoria's her latest project. Take her down too. I want the whole board dissolved Monday morning. Clean slate." "That's aggressive, Marcus. You're not just ending your marriage, you're destroying your wife's entire professional life." "She made her choice. She chose this world over me. Now she gets to see what this world really looks like when you don't understand the rules. Marcus signed the papers Arthur slid across the table, each signature committing to actions that would ripple through Victoria's life like earthquakes. What about Monday's logistics? Daniel brought up a floor plan of the executive boardroom. Victoria thinks she's meeting you at 10 for a divorce signing. She's bringing Eleanor and Richard as witnesses and support. What she doesn't know is that at 10:15, Sterling's board has been summoned for an emergency shareholder meeting. Richard's been invited to a separate meeting at 10:30 to discuss Hawthorne's proposal. Everyone's going to converge in the same boardroom. And when they do, you'll be sitting at the head of the table, chairman of Titan Holdings, the man Victoria divorced thinking he was a janitor with no prospects, the man who owns 58% of her company, the man who's about to fire her, and everyone who supported her decision to treat you like you were disposable. Marcus stared at the floor plan, imagining Monday morning, Victoria's face when she realized, Eleanor's shock, Richard's desperation. He should feel triumph. Instead, he just felt hollow. This is going to destroy her. Yes, Arthur agreed. It is. Last chance to back out. We can unwind the stock purchases, cancel the meetings, let the divorce go through quietly. You walk away, she walks away. Nobody's career burns to the ground. The temptation was real. Marcus had loved Victoria once. Part of him still did. The part that remembered coffee shops and shared dreams and promises made when they both had nothing to lose. But that Victoria was gone, replaced by someone who saw him as an obstacle to overcome. Someone who'd chosen status over substance, image over integrity. No, we proceed as planned. Monday morning, 10 o'clock, she learns the truth. All of it. Arthur and Daniel exchanged glances. Daniel spoke carefully. Boss, once this happens, there's no going back. Victoria will hate you. The business community will see you as ruthless. Your private life becomes public. 7 years of hiding who you are, gone in one morning. Good. I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of being invisible to the person who promised to see me. Marcus gathered the signed documents, handing them back to Arthur. File everything Sunday night. I want the SEC disclosures public first thing Monday morning. I want Sterling's board to walk into that meeting knowing they've been outmaneuvered. And I want Victoria to understand exactly what she threw away. He left the office, taking the elevator back down to the garage. The weekend stretched ahead, empty hours to reconsider, to back out, to choose mercy over justice. But Marcus knew himself well enough to know he wouldn't change his mind. He'd spent 5 years being patient, being understanding, being the man who didn't complain when his wife stopped seeing him. Monday, patience ended. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Marcus, it's Victoria. I'm at the Four Seasons. I know we said we'd wait until Monday, but I wanted you to know I'm having dinner with Richard tonight. We're discussing the Titan proposal strategy. I thought you should hear it from me instead of seeing it somewhere else. I'm sorry if this hurts, but we're not married anymore. Not really. Monday is just a formality. Marcus read the message 3 times, each word a fresh cut. She couldn't even wait until the divorce was final. 2 days and she was already moving on, already building the life that didn't include him. He typed a response, deleted it, typed another. Enjoy your dinner. See you Monday. Her response came immediately. Thank you for understanding. You're being very mature about this. Mature, as if he was a child accepting a punishment gracefully. As if her moving on with another man while still technically married was something he should applaud. Marcus threw the phone onto the passenger seat, gripping the steering wheel hard enough to hurt. Monday couldn't come fast enough. Sunday passed in a blur of final preparations. Daniel called twice with updates, documents filed, disclosures submitted, board members notified of Monday's emergency meeting. Arthur called once to confirm Victoria had received her official summons, disguised as a routine shareholder update. She'd responded via email, confused about the timing but planning to attend after the divorce signing. She had no idea the two events were connected. Marcus spent Sunday night in his real apartment, the penthouse 3 blocks from his pickup's parking spot. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, the kind of space that screamed wealth without needing to shout. He stood at the window, looking out at the city lights, and thought about Victoria in her Four Seasons room. Probably on the phone with Richard, strategizing. Probably excited about Monday, about signing away a marriage she saw as an anchor and stepping into a future she thought she'd earned. His phone buzzed. Daniel. Everything's ready. Board meeting set for 10:15. Richard's meeting at 10:30. Victoria's divorce signing at 10. It's all going to happen in the same room, exactly as planned. You sure about this? Marcus typed back, I'm sure. See you tomorrow. He didn't sleep. Instead, he watched the city slowly wake up, the sky lightening from black to gray to pale blue. Monday morning, the day Victoria thought her life would change for the better. She was right about the change, just wrong about the direction. At 8 a.m., Marcus dressed in a suit that cost more than Victoria's monthly salary. Charcoal gray, tailored perfectly, the kind of thing he'd only worn in private for years. Daniel had arranged for a barber to come to the apartment, shaping Marcus's hair into something executive instead of working class. The transformation in the mirror was startling. He looked like what he was, a man who'd built an $8 billion company from nothing. A man who'd been hiding in plain sight while his wife looked down on him. The car service arrived at 9, not his truck, not even Daniel's Mercedes. A town car with a professional driver, the kind of thing CEOs used without thinking about it. Marcus settled into the back seat, watching Manhattan scroll past the tinted windows. His phone buzzed. Victoria. On my way to Titan. See you at 10. Let's make this quick and painless. I have an important board meeting at 10:15 that I can't miss. Marcus smiled without humor. Quick and painless. She had no idea. The town car pulled up to Titan Holdings at 9:45. Marcus didn't use the executive entrance. Instead, he went through the lobby, wanting to see it the way Victoria would see it when she arrived. The marble floors he'd mopped as a janitor gleamed under recessed lighting. The security desk he'd checked in at for 2 years stood between the revolving doors and the elevator banks, the whole space designed to intimidate, to remind visitors they were entering a building where real power lived. Marcus took the executive elevator to 52, the car recognizing his fingerprint and bypassing every other floor. Daniel waited in the executive boardroom, everything prepared. The divorce papers sat at one end of the table. The hostile takeover documents sat at the other. In the middle, a file with Victoria's name on it, containing every mistake she'd made in the past 8 months as CEO. Daniel straightened Marcus's tie, a gesture that felt fatherly despite their professional relationship. Last chance, boss. We can still call this off. Send her to a different conference room, sign the divorce papers, let her go to her board meeting thinking everything's fine. Marcus shook his head. She made her choice when she told me to use the service elevator, when she said I was holding her back, when she went to dinner with Richard while we were still married. He moved to the head of the table, the chairman's seat, and sat down. I'm done being invisible. Time for Victoria to see exactly who she married. At 9:58, the elevator chimed. Victoria's voice carried down the hallway, bright with confidence and anticipation. She was talking to someone, probably Eleanor, probably about the board meeting and the Titan proposal, and the future she thought she was stepping into. Marcus heard her heels clicking on marble, getting closer. The boardroom door opened. Victoria stepped inside. Eleanor Crawford beside her. Richard Hawthorne behind them both. They were all smiling, all dressed for success, all completely unprepared for what was about to happen. Victoria saw Marcus sitting at the head of the table in his tailored suit and froze. Her smile faltered. Confusion flickered across her face, followed by something that might have been embarrassment. She glanced at Eleanor, then at Richard, then back at Marcus. Marcus? What are you doing sitting there? This is Titan's executive boardroom. Your friend said we could use a conference room, not... She stopped, the pieces not quite fitting together yet. Why are you wearing a suit? Marcus didn't stand. He didn't smile. He just looked at her, this woman he'd loved enough to hide his whole life from, and felt the last fragments of that love turn to ash. Have a seat, Victoria. We have a lot to discuss. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Richard stepped forward, his hand moving protectively to Victoria's back. Look, buddy, I don't know who you think you are, but we're here for a private meeting. You need to leave. Marcus finally smiled. It wasn't kind. No, Mr. Hawthorne. You're here because I invited you. All of you. 10 o'clock Monday morning, Titan Holdings Executive Boardroom. Exactly as planned. Victoria's face went pale. I don't understand. What's happening? The door opened behind them. Daniel stepped in, tablet in hand, his expression professionally neutral. Miss Sterling, Miss Crawford, Mr. Hawthorne, if you'll please have a seat, the chairman will explain everything. The chairman? Victoria's voice rose, panic threading through it. We're not here to see the chairman. We're here to sign divorce papers, and then I have a board meeting. You have the board meeting, Marcus interrupted. But it's not what you think it is. Sit down, Victoria. She sat. They all did, confusion and growing alarm clear on their faces. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she placed her purse on the table. Richard pulled out his phone, probably ready to call security. Victoria just stared at Marcus like she was seeing a stranger. Marcus leaned forward, his hands folded on the table. Welcome to Titan Holdings. I'm Marcus Blake, founder and CEO. Net worth approximately $8 billion. Majority shareholder in 23 states worth of commercial real estate and private equity. And as of 9 o'clock this morning, owner of 58% of Sterling Enterprises. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Eleanor made a small noise in the back of her throat. Richard's phone clattered to the table. Marcus smiled. Let's talk about your future, shall we? Or rather, the lack of one. Victoria's breathing came in shallow bursts, her chest rising and falling beneath the silk blouse she'd spent an hour selecting that morning. The color drained from her cheeks in stages, ivory to chalk to something closer to gray. Her fingers gripped the edge of the conference table hard enough that her knuckles went white. The diamonds in her wedding band catching light she no longer seemed to see. Eleanor recovered first, her decades of corporate maneuvering kicking in like muscle memory. This is absurd. Some kind of prank. Marcus is a janitor. I've seen him mopping floors at Sterling for 2 years. You have. Marcus kept his voice level, almost conversational. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. I particularly enjoyed cleaning the executive suite. You spill a lot of coffee, Eleanor. Careless for someone who likes to project control. Richard's hand moved to his phone again, but Daniel stepped forward smoothly, placing a tablet on the table. The screen displayed a Wall Street Journal article from that morning, the headline stark in bold print. Titan Holdings acquires majority stake in Sterling Enterprises. Below it, A photograph of Marcus at last year's Venture Capital Summit in Boston, shaking hands with the governor. That's photoshopped. Richard's voice cracked on the second word. This whole thing it's fraud. Identity theft. We'll sue for what? Daniel's tone carried the patience of someone explaining simple concepts to children. Mr. Blake has been CEO of Titan Holdings since its founding in 2015. His tax returns, SEC filings, and board minutes are all public record. The only fraud here is that he chose to maintain a second job in building maintenance. There's no law against that. Victoria finally found her voice, though it came out barely above a whisper. You're a janitor. I watched you clean our apartment. I did our laundry together with you at the laundromat on Saturdays. You drive a 20-year-old truck. I also own a penthouse in Tribeca, 3 properties in Cleveland, and a portfolio of tech startups worth more than Sterling's entire market cap. Marcus pulled up a file on the display screen. Financial statements scrolled past, each line item representing wealth Victoria couldn't begin to process. The truck belonged to my father. I keep it because it reminds me where I came from. Something you might have benefited from remembering. Eleanor's brain was working now, calculations visible behind her eyes. When we met at the charity luncheon 3 years ago, you were introduced as Victoria's husband, the janitor husband she was embarrassed about. If you were already a billionaire, then I wanted to see if she loved me. The actual me, not the bank account. Marcus leaned back in the chairman's seat, a position he'd occupied hundreds of times in private while pretending to push a mop in public. For a while I thought she did. We met when we were both broke. She was waiting tables, putting herself through business school. I was flipping my first property. We built something real. Or so I believed. You lied to me. Victoria's shock was crystallizing into anger, her voice gaining strength. You lied every single day for 5 years. You watched me struggle, watched me work myself to exhaustion trying to build a career, watched me stress about money and promotions and making ends meet, and you never said a word. I watched you change. I watched Eleanor poison you with ambition until you couldn't see anything except the next promotion, the next gala, the next opportunity to climb higher. Marcus's composure cracked slightly, real pain bleeding through. I watched you stop loving the man who fixed coffee machines and start resenting him for not being someone else, someone richer, someone more useful to your career. Richard pushed back from the table, standing abruptly. This is insane. Victoria, we're leaving. We'll get your lawyer on the phone, file complaints with the SEC about market manipulation, sue for emotional distress. Sit down, Mr. Hawthorne. Marcus didn't raise his voice, but something in his tone made Richard freeze. You're not going anywhere until we discuss Hawthorne Industries. The blood drained from Richard's face even faster than it had from Victoria's. He sat, slowly, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume on a man playing dress-up. Daniel pulled up a new file. This one showed financial statements in red, debt accumulation graphs trending upward like mountains, and a list of creditors that scrolled for 3 full screens. Hawthorne Industries, founded by your grandfather in 1962. Peak valuation in 2008 at $3.2 billion. Current valuation, accounting for debt obligations, negative $47 million. Victoria turned to stare at Richard, pieces clicking together in her mind. You told me your company was expanding. You said the Titan partnership would be good for both our firms. I said what you wanted to hear. Richard's mask of smooth confidence was completely gone now, replaced by desperation and anger. You were so eager to believe that someone successful wanted you, that someone from my level saw potential in you. You never questioned it because it fed your ego. You were using me. Victoria's voice went flat. The dinners, the introductions, the advice about my Titan proposal? You were positioning yourself as my partner so that when Titan approved Sterling's application, you could push for a merger. Use Sterling's assets to bail out Hawthorne. Smart woman. Took you long enough. Richard turned to Marcus, calculation replacing panic. But that doesn't change the fundamentals. Sterling needs Titan's capital. I need Sterling's revenue stream. We can still make a three-way partnership work. Blake, you want to punish your wife? Fine. You've done that. Made your point. Now let's talk business like adults. Marcus almost laughed. You think I'd partner with a company that's been cooking its books for 18 months? Daniel, show him what we found. The display shifted again. This time it showed internal Hawthorne documents, emails between Richard and his CFO discussing creative accounting, loans disguised as revenue, assets overvalued by factors of 10. Eleanor made a small sound in the back of her throat, her legal instincts recognizing criminal exposure when she saw it. The SEC is going to have questions about these emails. Daniel tapped the screen, highlighting particularly damning phrases. Fraud, securities manipulation, false statements to creditors. You were 6 months away from federal indictment, even before you tried to con Ms. Sterling into saving you. Richard stood again, but this time he was shaking. You can't prove those documents are real. My lawyers will. Your lawyers quit on Friday. All 3 of them. Marcus pulled up resignation letters, each one citing ethical concerns and non-payment of fees. You're broke, Richard. Your company is a shell. Your reputation is going to be in shreds by the time the financial press finishes with this story. And Victoria, he looked at his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, sitting shell-shocked at the conference table. Victoria was your last desperate play. She just didn't know it. Victoria's hands trembled as she pressed them flat against the table. I defended you to my board. I told them you had connections. I vouched for you. And I appreciate that. Really, I do. You were very useful. Richard grabbed his phone and briefcase, headed for the door. But I'm done with this circus. Sue me if you want. I'll be filing Chapter 11 by the end of the week anyway. Daniel stepped into his path. You'll stay until Mr. Blake dismisses you. We're not finished. Like hell I'll. Richard tried to push past, but Daniel didn't budge. Ex-military training evident in his stance, and the casual way he blocked the exit without appearing threatening. Richard took a step back, trapped. Marcus nodded to the door. Let him go. He's already destroyed. No point watching him bleed out. Daniel stepped aside. Richard fled without another word, his footsteps echoing down the marble hallway. In the silence that followed, Eleanor's breathing sounded loud and ragged. Victoria stared at the table, at her hands, at anything except Marcus. 5 years. Victoria's whisper cut through the quiet. 5 years you watched me, tested me, set me up to fail. I set you up to choose. Love or ambition. Character or climbing. You made your choice Saturday night when you told me to use the service elevator because being seen with me didn't look right. I was under pressure, Eleanor said. Victoria stopped, turned to look at her mentor. What did you say? About Marcus being dead weight? About needing a partner who fit my trajectory? Eleanor met her gaze without flinching. I said what you needed to hear to stop settling for less than you deserved. Marcus was holding you back. A janitor husband at CEO Gallus? That's social suicide. He wasn't a janitor. He's a billionaire. He owns Titan Holdings. I didn't know that, but Eleanor's voice carried doubt, and Victoria heard it. Didn't you? Marcus pulled up another file. You did background checks on me 3 years ago, Eleanor, when Victoria first introduced us at that charity luncheon. You hired a private investigator to look into my finances, my employment history, my criminal record. Eleanor's jaw tightened. Standard due diligence. I protect my mentees. Your investigator found Marcus Blake, maintenance worker at Sterling Enterprises, high school diploma, no criminal record, modest savings account. He didn't find Marcus Blake, CEO of Titan Holdings, because they're technically two different employment identities. The social security numbers are the same, but the corporate filings use my middle initial, Michael. Marcus Michael Blake versus Marcus Blake. Daniel brought up the documents, showing the subtle distinction that had kept Marcus's dual life separate. A thorough investigator would have caught it. Yours either wasn't thorough or you didn't pay him enough to look deeper than surface level. So I missed it. That doesn't change the fundamental truth that Victoria was married to someone she perceived as beneath her station. My advice was sound based on available information. Your advice was poison. Marcus's voice went cold. You convinced her that worth is measured in titles and tax brackets, that a man who works with his hands is inherently less valuable than a man who works a spreadsheet. You turned my wife into someone who looks down on the same working-class background she came from. Eleanor stood, gathering her composure like armor. I turned your wife into a CEO. I gave her confidence and connections and the skills to navigate a world that would have chewed her up otherwise. If that offends your blue-collar sensibilities, I don't particularly care. You turned her into someone who values appearance over substance. Someone who'd rather marry a fraud like Richard Hawthorne than stay with a man who actually loves her. Loved. Past tense. Victoria's voice was barely audible. You don't love me anymore. You wouldn't be doing this if you did. Marcus wanted to deny it. Wanted to say the love was still there, buried under the hurt and anger. But looking at her now, at this woman who'd become a stranger, wrapped in designer clothes and borrowed confidence, he wasn't sure that was true. I loved who you were. I don't know who you are anymore. Then let's finish this. Victoria pulled the divorce papers toward her, the documents they'd ostensibly come here to sign. You wanted a reckoning. You've had it. Richard's exposed. Eleanor's advice looks foolish in hindsight. I'm humiliated. Point made. Let's sign these and be done. Not yet. Marcus slid a different set of papers across the table. First, let's discuss your proposal to Titan Holdings. Victoria's hand froze halfway to the pen. What about it? You submitted 4 proposals over 6 months. Each one was rejected. Do you know why? The board said we needed to strengthen our capital position, improve our debt-to-equity ratio, show better long-term growth projections. The board said that because I told them to say that. I personally reviewed each proposal, Victoria. I read every word. And each time I sent them back with detailed notes about why Sterling wasn't ready for a partnership with Titan. The color returned to Victoria's cheeks, but this time it was anger, not shock. You sabotaged me. You tanked my proposals deliberately. I rejected them because they were bad proposals. Buzzwords and borrowed strategy, all surface and no foundation. Eleanor's fingerprints were all over them. Aggressive expansion timelines with no realistic funding model. Partnerships with companies you hadn't properly vetted. Promises you couldn't keep. Marcus pulled up the proposals on screen, highlighting sections in red. Proposal 1 claimed Sterling could increase revenue 40% in 18 months. Based on what? Hope and good intentions? Based on market analysis and projected growth in our sector? Based on optimism and desperation. Your sector was contracting, not expanding. Any competent analyst would have caught that. but you were so focused on impressing Titan that you didn't do basic due diligence. Victoria stared at the highlighted sections, seeing them with new eyes, seeing them the way a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar equity firm would see them. Amateurish, overconfident, built on assumptions instead of data. Proposal 2 was worse. Marcus scrolled to the next document. You proposed a partnership structure that would have given Titan 70% control of Sterling's assets in exchange for a capital injection you didn't actually need. You were essentially selling your company for the privilege of saying you'd partnered with us. Eleanor said Eleanor was wrong, or she was setting you up to fail. I haven't decided which yet. Eleanor's face went very still. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious pattern. 3 years of advice that's pushed Victoria toward increasingly risky decisions, encouraged her to expand faster than sustainable, told her to divorce the janitor and marry the fraud, pushed her to stake Sterling's future on a Titan partnership that was never going to happen. Marcus turned back to Victoria. Who benefits if Sterling collapses under debt it can't service? Who's positioned to buy up assets at bankruptcy prices? Victoria's eyes widened. Eleanor's investment group, the one she mentioned at last month's board meeting. She said she was looking for acquisition opportunities in our sector. She's been positioning herself to cannibalize Sterling for parts, convince you to overextend, watch you fail, then swoop in as the savior who'll purchase your best divisions for pennies on the dollar. Eleanor's composure finally cracked. That's a conspiracy theory built on paranoia. I've devoted 3 years to mentoring Victoria, hundreds of hours of my time, my connections, my reputation vouching for her. Why would I do that if I wanted her to fail? Because a protege who succeeds independently doesn't need a mentor anymore. But a protege who fails spectacularly? She's grateful for whoever picks her up afterward. She's loyal. She's controllable. Marcus pulled up emails, forwarded chains between Eleanor and her investment partners. You've been shopping Sterling's client list to your partners for 8 months, before Victoria even knew the company was vulnerable. The evidence on screen was damning. Client lists, revenue projections, asset valuations, all the internal data Eleanor would have access to as board chair, all being shared with outside investors who'd benefit from Sterling's collapse. Victoria stood slowly, her chair scraping against marble. She walked to where Eleanor sat, looking down at the woman who'd shaped her career for 3 years. You were going to let me fail. You were counting on it. I was preparing for contingencies. That's what smart business people do. Eleanor's voice had gone flat, defensive. You're young and inexperienced. The odds of you successfully navigating a major partnership were always slim. I wanted to ensure Sterling's assets ended up in good hands if the worst happened. Good hands. Your hands. Better mine than liquidated in bankruptcy court. Victoria's slap echoed through the boardroom. Eleanor's head snapped to the side, a red mark blooming on her cheek. She touched it gingerly, shock and anger warring in her expression. You're fired. Victoria's voice shook, but the words were clear. From the board. From any advisory capacity. From ever speaking to me again. You can't fire me. I'm an independent board member elected by shareholders. Actually, she can. Daniel pulled up more documents. Mr. Blake's 58% ownership stake gives him controlling votes. He can dissolve the current board and seat new members at will, including removing Eleanor Crawford effective immediately. Marcus nodded. Consider yourself removed, Eleanor. You have until end of business today to clear out your office at Sterling. Security will escort you. If you've taken any company property beyond what you're contractually entitled to, we'll pursue criminal charges. Eleanor stood, gathering the shreds of her dignity. This is illegal. I have contracts. I have protections. You have violations of fiduciary duty documented in your own emails. You want to fight this in court, I have lawyers who'll bury you in motions until you run out of money for legal fees. Marcus's tone left no room for negotiation. Or you can leave quietly, and we'll let the corporate community assume you retired. Your choice. Eleanor looked at Victoria one last time. I gave you everything, taught you everything, and this is how you repay me? You taught me to value the wrong things, to measure people by their usefulness instead of their character. Victoria's voice was steady now, certain. Marcus might be destroying my career right now, but at least he's honest about it. You were destroying it slowly while pretending to be my friend. Eleanor left without another word. The door closed behind her with a quiet click that sounded like a cell door locking. Victoria sank back into her chair, the fight draining out of her. How much more? How much more do you need to destroy before this is finished? We're just getting started. Marcus checked his watch. Sterling's board should be arriving any minute. Emergency shareholder meeting. They've been told that Titan Holdings has acquired majority control and wants to discuss immediate restructuring. Restructuring. Victoria closed her eyes. You're going to gut the company. Fire everyone I hire. Undo everything I built. I'm going to fix the mistakes Eleanor convinced you to make. The overextension, the bad partnerships, the projects that were bleeding money to make growth numbers look good on paper. Marcus pulled up Sterling's actual financials, not the rosy projections Victoria had been presenting to the board. You've been CEO for 8 months. In that time, revenue is up 18%, but profit is down 6%. You've been buying growth with debt you can't service long term. I was following the strategy Eleanor and I developed. You were following a strategy designed to make you fail. I'm offering you a chance to see what sustainable success looks like. The boardroom door opened. Daniel escorted in 5 people, Sterling's board of directors, each one looking confused and concerned. They recognized Victoria immediately, saw Marcus in the chairman's seat, and their confusion deepened. Marcus stood, extending a hand to the nearest board member. Thank you all for coming on short notice. I'm Marcus Blake, CEO of Titan Holdings. As of this morning, my company owns 58% of Sterling Enterprises. That makes me your new majority shareholder. The board members sank into chairs, shock rippling through them. Victoria watched their faces, saw the moment they started calculating what this meant for their positions, their stock options, their futures. The same calculations she'd made countless times about other people's careers. Effective immediately, I'm dissolving this board. Marcus's words landed like grenades. You'll all receive the severance packages outlined in your contracts. I appreciate your service to Sterling, but the company needs a fresh direction. One of the board members, a silver-haired man who'd been with Sterling for 15 years, found his voice. You can't just dissolve an entire board. There are procedures, shareholder votes, legal requirements, all of which I've followed. Daniel, if you'll distribute the documentation. Daniel handed out folders, each one containing the legal justification for the board's termination. The silver-haired man read through his, the color draining from his face, as he saw how thoroughly Marcus had outmaneuvered them. This is a hostile takeover. Another board member, a woman in her 40s, spoke up. You've been acquiring stock in secret for months. The SEC should have been notified when you crossed the 5% threshold. We notified them the moment we crossed 5%. Each acquisition after that was also properly disclosed. You can verify with the SEC's public filings if you'd like. Marcus remained calm, almost gentle. This is hostile only in the sense that I didn't ask permission. Everything was legal. Everything was by the book. Victoria listened to the board dissolve around her, these people who'd supported her promotion to CEO, now being dismissed with the stroke of a pen. She should feel outraged, defensive, ready to fight. Instead, she just felt tired. "What happens to Victoria?" The silver-haired man asked the question Victoria couldn't bring herself to voice. "She's CEO. Is she being terminated as well?" Marcus turned to look at her, and for just a moment, something soft flickered in his expression. The man who'd loved her. The man who'd spent 5 years pretending to be someone else just to see if she'd love him back. Then the moment passed, and he was the CEO again. Cold, calculating, in control. Victoria Sterling is terminated as Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Enterprises, effective immediately. Cause: catastrophic judgment in leadership, financial overextension on unsustainable projects, and association with individuals currently under investigation for securities fraud. The words hit like physical blows. Victoria heard them from a distance, as if someone else was being fired. Someone else's career was ending. This couldn't be happening. This was supposed to be the day Titan approved her proposal, the day she proved Eleanor right about her potential, the day she left Marcus and his janitor life behind and stepped fully into the world she'd been building. Instead, everything was ashes. However, Marcus's voice pulled her back. "I'm not completely without mercy. I'm offering you a position as strategic consultant for Sterling's operations, $80,000 annually. You'll report to the new CEO and provide analysis on market trends, competitive positioning, and operational efficiency." $80,000. She'd been making $350,000 as CEO, plus bonuses and stock options. $80,000 was entry-level salary, junior analyst pay. "Who's the new CEO?" Victoria's voice came out hollow. "Patricia Morales, currently Director of Customer Relations. Before that, she ran your mailroom for 2 years. She has a degree from community college and 15 years of experience in operations. She understands Sterling's business from the ground up." Victoria remembered Patricia, remembered dismissing her application for a management position 18 months ago because her degree wasn't from a prestigious school. Remembered Eleanor saying that pedigree mattered in executive roles, that community college graduates didn't have the polish required for leadership. "You're putting me under someone I rejected for promotion, someone I told would never be executive material." Poetic, isn't it? Marcus's smile held no warmth. "Patricia's been running circles around your executive team for 2 years. She knows the business better than anyone in this room. She just didn't have the right credentials on paper." Turns out, credentials aren't everything. The implication landed like a slap. Victoria had valued credentials over competence, pedigree over performance, just like she'd valued Richard's connections over Marcus's character. "What if I refuse? The consultant position?" "Then you leave with nothing except what's outlined in your employment contract. 3-month severance, your vested stock options, which will be worthless once I restructure the company, and a non-compete clause that prevents you from working in private equity or venture capital for 3 years. Marcus slid a document across the table. "Your choice. Take the consultant role, report to Patricia, rebuild your reputation from the ground up. Or walk away and spend the next 3 years explaining to potential employers why the CEO of Titan Holdings fired you for cause." Victoria picked up the document, scanning terms that reduced her from corner office to cubicle, from executive to employee, from decision-maker to advisor. Every word was a humiliation carefully crafted to remind her of what she'd lost. "I'll take the consultant position." "Excellent. Report Monday morning, 8 a.m., business casual dress code. Patricia will brief you on your first assignment." Marcus nodded to Daniel, who escorted the shell-shocked board members from the room. They filed out quietly, clutching their severance packages, already calculating their next moves. The room emptied until only Marcus and Victoria remained. The divorce papers still sat on the table between them, unsigned. The marriage that had brought them to this moment hung in the air like smoke. Victoria reached for the papers, but Marcus was faster. He pulled them toward himself, scanning the terms she'd dictated. $25,000, the pickup truck, nothing else. You thought this was generous, for someone with my limited prospects. He pulled a pen from his pocket, signing his name with swift, angry strokes. I'm going to give you exactly what you offered me. $25,000 and the car you leased, which you can't afford the payments on anymore. See how generous it feels from the other side? He slid the papers across. Victoria signed without reading them, her hand shaking so badly the signature looked nothing like her usual controlled script. The moment the pen left paper, it was over. 5 years of marriage dissolved into legal documentation. I'm sorry, Victoria's whisper barely carried across the table. I'm so sorry, Marcus. I was wrong. About everything. Eleanor, Richard, measuring your worth by your job instead of who you are. I was wrong. I know you are. Now. But you weren't sorry Saturday when you told me to use the service elevator. You weren't sorry yesterday when you texted me about having dinner with Richard. You're sorry because you got caught, because the man you dismissed as a janitor turned out to be the CEO you were desperate to impress. That's not fair. Fair? Marcus stood, gathering the signed divorce papers. You want to talk about fair? I spent 5 years loving you while you slowly stopped loving me back. I watched you choose ambition over integrity, status over substance, Eleanor's poison over my partnership. I tested you, yes. I shouldn't have. That was wrong. But you failed anyway. Victoria stood too, tears finally breaking through her control. I loved you. I did. I got scared. I grew up poor, Marcus. I watched my father lose everything when the factory closed. I swore I'd never be that vulnerable again. Never dependent on someone else's paycheck. Never one layoff away from losing the lights. So you became the person who looks down on factory workers, who sees janitors as less than human, who measures worth in stock options and corner offices. Marcus moved toward the door, then stopped. I grew up poor too, Victoria. My father cleaned buildings for 30 years. He taught me that honest work has dignity, that character matters more than credentials. You knew that once. I fell in love with the woman who believed it. I don't know what happened to her. She got lost. Victoria wiped at her eyes, mascara smearing across her fingers. She got so focused on never being poor again that she forgot why being poor was hard. It wasn't the money. It was people treating you like you didn't matter because you didn't have enough of it. And then you became one of those people. Yes. The admission broke something in her chest. I became exactly what I hated. And I lost the only person who ever loved me for who I actually was. Marcus stood in the doorway, his back to her. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then quietly, for what it's worth, I did love you. The real you, buried under Eleanor's makeover and Richard's manipulation. I hope you find her again. I hope working for Patricia, earning an honest paycheck, being accountable to someone who doesn't care about your pedigree, I hope it reminds you who you used to be. Will you ever forgive me? I don't know. Ask me in a year. After you've walked in my shoes for a while. He left. Victoria stood alone in the boardroom that had witnessed her professional execution, surrounded by leather chairs and mahogany furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed a city she'd thought she was conquering. Her phone buzzed, text messages from colleagues who'd seen the SEC filings, the news coverage, the social media speculation, each one a variation of the same question. What happened? She'd happened. Her choices, her pride, her willingness to trade substance for surface, character for climbing, love for the illusion of success. Victoria gathered her purse, her phone, the divorce papers that reduced 5 years to dollar amounts and asset divisions. The executive elevator refused her fingerprint, access already revoked. She took the stairs down 52 floors, her heels clicking against concrete, each step a small humiliation. By the time she reached the lobby, her feet were bleeding and her legs were shaking. The security guard at the front desk didn't recognize her. Or maybe he did and just didn't care anymore. She wasn't CEO. She wasn't important. She was just another person leaving the building. No different from the maintenance workers and mail clerks and security personnel she'd spent 3 years trying to distance herself from. Outside, rain had started. Cold October rain that soaked through her silk blouse in seconds. Victoria stood on the sidewalk, watching yellow cabs splash past, and realized she didn't know where to go. The apartment was Marcus's. The Four Seasons room had been for one night. Richard wouldn't return her calls. Eleanor was gone. The career she'd built was rubble. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through contacts until she found one she hadn't called in 2 years. Her mother, the retail worker who'd raised her in a 2-bedroom apartment in Pennsylvania, who'd warned her that chasing money would cost her everything that actually mattered. The phone rang 3 times before her mother answered. "Victoria? Honey, is that you?" Victoria opened her mouth to say she was fine, that everything was under control, that she didn't need help. Instead, what came out was, "Mom, I made a really big mistake." "Where are you, baby?" "Manhattan. Outside Titan Holdings." "It's raining and I don't have anywhere to go." "Take a taxi to Penn Station. There's a train to Philadelphia in 90 minutes. I'll pick you up at 30th Street. We'll figure this out together." Victoria hung up, flagged a cab, gave the driver directions through tears she couldn't stop. As the taxi pulled away from Titan Holdings, she looked back one more time. 52 floors up, she imagined Marcus in his corner office, looking down at the city he'd conquered while pretending to be invisible. She'd done this to herself. Eleanor had poisoned her, Richard had used her, but she'd made every choice that led to this moment. She'd valued appearance over reality. She'd chosen wrong. Now she'd spend however long it took learning to choose right again. 3 months later, Victoria Sterling walked into the Sterling Titan offices at 7:45 in the morning, 15 minutes early for her 8 o'clock start time. The security guard nodded as she scanned her badge, the same guard who used to greet her with deference when she'd been CEO. Now he just waved her through like any other employee, his attention already back on his phone. The elevator didn't recognize her fingerprint anymore. She rode up with maintenance workers and mailroom staff, pressed against the back wall as people filed in and out on floors she used to breeze past in the executive car. Floor 32 was operations and mid-level management, a maze of cubicles and conference rooms lit by fluorescent strips instead of the natural light that flooded the executive suite. Her cubicle sat in the middle of the floor. No windows, no door, no privacy. 5 feet by 5 feet of beige fabric walls and a laminate desk that wobbled when she set down her coffee. The nameplate read, V. Sterling, Strategic Consultant, in letters smaller than the ones used for administrative assistants. She'd spent her first day trying to figure out how to fit her laptop, notebook, and coffee cup on a surface designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Patricia Morales' office sat 30 feet away, glass-walled and bright, the corner space that used to be Victoria's. Through the windows, she could see Patricia on a conference call, animated and confident, making decisions that Victoria used to make. Patricia had redecorated immediately, replacing Victoria's modern minimalism with family photos and potted plants, making the space feel lived in rather than performed. Victoria's first assignment had been market research for a Midwest expansion, entry-level work that she'd delegated to junior analysts when she was CEO. Now she was the junior analyst, compiling spreadsheets and summarizing trends, her insights reviewed by people who used to report to her. The break room was worse. She'd gone for coffee her second week and found a cluster of former colleagues huddled by the coffee maker, conversation dying the moment she walked in. They'd smiled politely, said hello with the kind of careful neutrality people used around the recently disgraced, then found excuses to leave. She'd stood alone by the coffee maker, adding cream with hands that shook slightly, pretending not to notice the whispers that started the moment she left. By the end of the first month, she'd stopped going to the break room. She brought coffee from home in a travel mug, ate lunch at her desk, kept her head down, and her interactions minimal. The invisibility she'd once pitied in others had become her refuge. Patricia summoned her to the glass office on a Tuesday morning in late January. Victoria gathered her notes, smoothing her blouse nervously before walking the 30 feet that felt like 30 miles. Patricia looked up from her computer, gestured to the chair across from her desk. Market research looks good. Thorough analysis, actionable recommendations. I'm impressed. Victoria felt a flush of something that might have been pride or might have been relief. Thank you. I found some interesting demographic shifts in the Cincinnati market that might affect our positioning strategy. I saw that. Smart catch. I'm incorporating it into the expansion plan. Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying Victoria with an expression that was harder to read than her professional approval. Can I ask you something off the record? Of course. Why did you reject my application for VP of Operations 18 months ago? The question landed like a gut punch. Victoria had known it was coming eventually, had rehearsed answers in her head during sleepless nights. But sitting across from Patricia in the office that used to be hers, all the rehearsed words evaporated. Because Eleanor told me you didn't have the right educational background, that community college degrees don't translate to executive presence, that our board and investors would question the hire. The honesty tasted like ash. I should have looked at your actual performance, your track record, the way people in your department trusted and respected you. Instead, I looked at your resume and made assumptions. Patricia nodded slowly. Eleanor Crawford built an empire on assumptions like that. Pedigree over performance. Connections over competence. She convinced a lot of smart people to make stupid decisions. She convinced me I was better than people who worked with their hands. Better than people who came from where I came from. Victoria met Patricia's eyes, not flinching from the judgment she saw there. I'm sorry. For what it's worth, you're a better CEO than I ever was. The numbers prove it. Profits up 11% since you took over. 12% as of last quarter, but I appreciate the apology. Patricia pulled up something on her computer, turned the screen so Victoria could see. I'm restructuring the strategic consulting team. Creating a new role. Director of Market Analysis. Reports directly to me. Coordinates with all department heads on expansion planning and competitive positioning. 120,000 base, plus performance bonuses. I want you to apply. Victoria stared at the job description, reading it twice to make sure she understood. You want me to apply for a promotion? After what I did? I want you to apply because you're good at the work. The market research you've been doing is the best analysis we've had in 2 years. You understand the business, you understand the sector, and you've learned what it feels like to be on the bottom, looking up. Patricia's expression softened slightly. You made mistakes. You're paying for them. But that doesn't mean you should pay forever. Apply for the position. If you're the best candidate, the job is yours. Victoria walked back to her cubicle in a daze, the job description printed out and clutched in her hand. A promotion. Not back to CEO, not close to where she'd been, but up from the bottom. A chance to climb based on actual merit instead of Eleanor's manipulation or Marcus's punishment. She sat at her wobbling desk and started drafting her application, pouring 3 months of hard-won humility into every sentence. Her apartment in Brooklyn was a studio on the 4th floor of a walk-up, 600 square feet that smelled like the Indian restaurant downstairs. The rent was $800 a month, twice what she could really afford on her consultant salary, but it was the cheapest place she'd found that didn't require 3 roommates. The furniture was second-hand, purchased from a graduate student on Craigslist who was moving to California. A futon that doubled as bed and couch, a folding table that served as desk and dining surface. A bookshelf Marcus had built for her 7 years ago, solid oak with dovetailed joints, her name carved on the back in his careful handwriting. She'd kept the bookshelf through every move, every upgrade, every attempt to erase her working-class past with expensive furniture from designer showrooms. When she'd packed up her things from the apartment she'd shared with Marcus, the bookshelf was the only piece she couldn't bear to leave behind. Everything else could be replaced. But this? His hands had shaped this wood, his tools had cut these joints, his care had made something beautiful and lasting. Victoria ran her fingers over the carved letters now, tracing V-I-C-T-O-R-I-A, in script that had taken him hours. Below her name, smaller, almost hidden, Marcus loves you. She'd discovered the inscription 3 months after he'd given her the bookshelf, moving it to reach a dropped earring. She'd cried then, overwhelmed by the sweetness of his secret message. She cried now for different reasons. Her phone rang. Her mother's name appeared on the screen, the 3rd call this week. Victoria had spent 2 weeks in Philadelphia after the divorce, sleeping in her childhood bedroom, eating her mother's cooking, slowly remembering what it felt like to be loved without conditions. Her mother had asked one question, "Do you still love him?" Victoria had said yes. Her mother had nodded and said, "Then figure out how to be someone worthy of getting him back." "Hi, Mom." "How's my girl? You sound tired." "Long day, but good. Patricia might promote me to Director of Market Analysis." Her mother's pleasure carried through the phone. "That's wonderful, honey. See? Hard work pays off. Your father would be so proud." Her father, the factory worker who'd lost everything when the plant closed, who'd spent his last years delivering pizzas to make rent, who died believing he'd failed his family. Victoria had spent so much energy trying not to become him that she'd forgotten to honor what he'd actually been: honest, hard-working, decent. Everything she'd lost chasing Eleanor's version of success. "Mom, can I ask you something? When Dad lost his job, when we were struggling, were you ashamed of him?" The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Victoria thought the call had dropped. Then her mother's voice came back, thoughtful and sad. "Never. Not once. I was scared, yes. I was angry at the company that closed the plant. I was frustrated with the economy and the system and every politician who'd promised things would get better. But ashamed of your father? Baby, he worked harder delivering pizzas than most CEOs work in their corner offices. He had more dignity in his work boots than most men have in Italian leather. I loved him more at the end than I did at the beginning, because I got to see what he was made of when everything else was stripped away." Victoria pressed her palm against the carved letters on the bookshelf. "I think I understand now. What you tried to tell me when I started dating Marcus about what matters. You're learning. That's what counts. Now tell me, have you talked to him? Since the divorce?" "No. He made it clear he was done. I destroyed what we had." "Maybe. Or maybe he destroyed it too by testing you instead of trusting you. Relationships don't end because one person makes mistakes, Victoria. They end because both people stop fighting for them. Her mother's voice gentled. If you still love him, find a way to say so. Even if he can't hear it yet. Even if he never hears it. You need to say it for yourself. After they hung up, Victoria pulled out her laptop and started writing. Not a text message, not an email. A letter. The kind people used to write when words mattered too much to trust a digital transmission. She wrote for 3 hours, deleting and rewriting, trying to capture everything she'd learned in the wreckage of her marriage and career. When she finished, the letter was 2 pages long and stained with tears that smudged the ink in places. She folded it carefully, slid it into an envelope, wrote Marcus's name on the front in her best handwriting. Then she addressed it to Titan Holdings, attention Daniel Shaw, with a note asking him to deliver it personally. She mailed it the next morning, dropping it in the blue postal box on the corner before she could change her mind. Whether Marcus would read it, whether he'd respond, whether it would change anything. Those were questions beyond her control. All she could do was tell the truth. The rest was up to him. Marcus stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Tribeca penthouse, watching snow fall over Manhattan. February had arrived cold and clean, blanketing the city in white that would turn to gray slush by afternoon. He held a tumbler of scotch he wasn't drinking, had been holding it for 20 minutes while his mind circled the same thoughts it had circled every night for 3 months. He'd won. Titan Holdings stock was up 40%. The Sterling Titan acquisition was being called a masterclass in strategic positioning by every business journal from Wall Street to Silicon Valley. Forbes had done a cover story. The Blue-Collar Billionaire, How Marcus Blake Built an Empire While Mopping Floors. The article painted him as a genius, a visionary, a man who'd played the long game and won spectacularly. He'd donated $50 million to trade schools and community colleges across the Midwest, funding programs that taught welding and electrical work and plumbing. The same skills his father had taught him, the same honest labor that Eleanor and her kind looked down on. The press loved it. Marcus Blake, the billionaire who remembered his roots, who gave back to working-class communities. But the penthouse was silent. His achievements echoed in empty rooms. He'd spent 5 years hiding his success, pretending to be ordinary, living a double life. Now that the truth was public, now that everyone knew who Marcus Blake really was, he discovered that success without someone to share it with was just expensive loneliness. Daniel had warned him the night after Victoria's firing, after Marcus had returned to the penthouse, still shaking with adrenaline and anger and hollow victory. Daniel had looked at him with something close to pity. You won, boss. But I'm not sure what you won actually matters. Marcus hadn't understood then. He'd been too focused on the immediate satisfaction of watching Victoria's world crumble, of seeing Eleanor exposed, of proving that the janitor she'd dismissed was worth more than all of them combined. But 3 months of waking up alone, of eating meals at a table designed for 8, of having no one to call when good news came through or bad days piled up. 3 months had clarified Daniel's meaning. He'd won the battle and lost something more valuable in the process. The closet in his bedroom held Victoria's old waitress uniform, the polyester dress she'd worn when they met, stained with coffee and smelling faintly of grease despite years in storage. Marcus had kept it as a reminder of who they'd both been before ambition and fear and Eleanor's poison had twisted everything. He pulled it out now, holding the cheap fabric in his hands, remembering. The coffee shop had been called Morningside Brew, a hole-in-the-wall place near Columbia University where students and struggling artists went for caffeine they could afford. Marcus had been there, meeting with an investor about his 3rd property flip, dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt because suits made him uncomfortable. Victoria had been rushing between tables, her order pad full and her smile forced because rent was due and her tips had been terrible all week. She'd tripped on a backpack someone left in the aisle. The coffee pot had sailed from her hands in slow motion, and Marcus had lunged forward without thinking, catching it inches before it shattered on the floor. Their hands had touched on the handle, her fingers cold and trembling, his steady and sure. "Thank you." Her voice had shaken with relief and exhaustion. "I can't afford to replace another pot this month." "You work here long?" He'd handed her the pot, noticing the dark circles under her eyes, the way her uniform hung loose, like she'd lost weight she didn't have to lose. 8 months. Putting myself through business school. MBA program starts in the fall if I can save enough for the deposit. That's ambitious. Good for you. She'd smiled then, genuine instead of forced. Ambitious or stupid? Haven't decided yet. But I'm tired of being invisible, tired of people looking through me like I'm furniture. Marcus had understood that bone deep. The invisibility of working-class life, of being someone other people forgot the moment you left the room. I'm Marcus. Victoria, but everyone here calls me Vicky. Which do you prefer? She'd paused, considering. Victoria. Vicky sounds like someone who'll be waiting tables forever. Victoria sounds like someone who might own the restaurant someday. He'd left her a $50 tip on a $5 coffee, and when she'd chased him outside to tell him he'd made a mistake, he'd asked her to dinner instead. They'd gone to a cheap Thai place where the pad see ew cost $6 and tasted better than anything he'd eaten since. She'd talked about her plans, her dreams, her determination to never be poor again. He'd talked about his father, about honest work, about building something that mattered. By the end of the night, he'd known 2 things. He was going to marry this woman, and he was never going to tell her about the money. Not until he was sure she loved him for reasons that had nothing to do with his portfolio. 5 years later, he'd gotten his answer. She hadn't loved him. Or maybe she had, once, and then Eleanor had shown her a different version of success, a version where Marcus's calloused hands and modest lifestyle were embarrassments to overcome, rather than choices to respect. Marcus hung the uniform back in the closet, closed the door on memories that hurt too much to hold. His phone showed 6 missed calls from journalists wanting interviews, 3 from board members with quarterly reports, 1 from his lawyer with updates on Richard Hawthorne's bankruptcy proceedings. Nothing that mattered. Nothing that filled the silence. Daniel found him still standing at the window an hour later, the scotch untouched and warming in his hand. You've been standing there for 90 minutes, boss. I have the Humanitarian Award Gala tonight. You're scheduled to give the keynote speech. Cancel it. That's the 6th event you've canceled this month. People are starting to notice. Let them notice. Daniel moved to stand beside him, looking out at the falling snow. She wrote you a letter. Came to my office yesterday, hand-delivered to avoid going through your assistant. Asked me to give it to you when you were ready to read it. Marcus's chest tightened. What does it say? I didn't read it, but she cried when she gave it to me. Real tears, not the kind people use for manipulation. She said to tell you she understands if you never want to hear from her again. She just needed you to know she was sorry. Sorry doesn't undo 3 years of being treated like I was worthless. No, but it's a start. Daniel pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, set it on the window ledge. Read it or don't, your choice. But I'm going to say something I probably shouldn't, and you can fire me if you want. You've never worried about getting fired before. True. Here it is. You won, boss. You destroyed her career, humiliated her in front of everyone she knew, proved you were smarter and richer and more powerful than she'd ever imagined. You won completely and absolutely. But you look more miserable now than when you were mopping floors and she was ignoring you at galas. Daniel's voice was gentle, almost fatherly. Maybe winning isn't actually what you needed. He left before Marcus could respond. The envelope sat on the window ledge, Victoria's handwriting stark against white paper. Marcus stared at it for a long time, watching snow fall and night descend on Manhattan, before he finally picked it up. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten, some words smudged where tears had fallen. Marcus read it standing at the window, then sat down on the floor and read it again. Then a third time, because the first 2 readings had shattered something in his chest that he'd been keeping carefully frozen. Dear Marcus, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect forgiveness. But I need to say these things, even if only to an empty void. Because my mother was right. I need to say them for myself. You were right about everything. I chose status over love. I chose Eleanor's poison over your devotion. I chose a fantasy over the reality standing right in front of me, and I destroyed the only thing that actually mattered in my pursuit of things that don't. I've spent 3 months working in a cubicle at Sterling Titan, reporting to Patricia Morales, doing entry-level market research for $80,000 a year. Every morning, I ride the elevator with maintenance workers and mailroom staff, instead of taking the executive car. Every lunch, I eat at my desk, instead of at restaurants where meals cost more than some people make in a day. Every evening, I go home to a studio apartment in Brooklyn that smells like curry and has a futon instead of a bed. And I'm happier than I've been in 3 years. Not happy. I destroyed my marriage and my career, and I have no illusions that I don't deserve exactly what I got. But there's a kind of peace in knowing who I actually am instead of pretending to be who Eleanor told me I should be. There's dignity in doing good work and earning an honest paycheck, even if the paycheck is smaller than I'm used to. There's freedom in not constantly measuring myself against people who have more money, more status, more of whatever Eleanor convinced me was supposed to matter. I found the bookshelf you built me. It's the only piece of furniture I kept from our apartment. The only thing I couldn't bear to leave behind. I discovered your message carved on the back. Marcus loves you. And I cried for 2 hours because I finally understood what I'd thrown away. You loved me when I was a waitress with nothing but student loans and dreams. You loved me when I was stressed about rent and failing at cooking and scared about the future. You loved me through promotions and setbacks and every stage of becoming who I thought I needed to be. And I repaid that love by treating you like you weren't enough because you didn't fit the image Eleanor said I needed. I don't know if you ever truly loved me or if I was just an experiment, a test to see if I'd choose right when it mattered. Maybe I was both. Someone you loved and someone you were testing. Either way, I failed. I chose wrong. And I'm sorry. I'm not asking for another chance. I know I don't deserve one. I'm just asking you to know that I finally understand what you were trying to teach me. That worth isn't measured in titles or bank accounts. That honest work has more dignity than borrowed status. That character matters more than credentials. That the man who mopped floors and built bookshelves and loved me when I had nothing to offer but myself was worth more than all the CEOs and billionaires in Manhattan. I hope you find someone who sees your value from the beginning, Marcus. Someone who doesn't need to lose everything to understand what they had. Someone who loves the janitor and the CEO equally because they understand those are just different versions of the same good man. I'll carry the weight of losing you for the rest of my life. It's the punishment I deserve, and I accept it. But I needed you to know, I finally see you. All of you. And I'm sorry it took losing you to learn how to look. Victoria P. I still have the bookshelf you built. It's in my studio apartment, holding the business textbooks I'm rereading to remember why I fell in love with this work in the first place. Every time I look at it, I remember the man who made something beautiful with his hands and gave it to me like it was nothing. Like making me happy was the easiest thing in the world. I'm sorry I forgot how rare that is. I'm sorry I forgot how rare you are. Marcus sat on the floor of his penthouse, letter in hand, and felt the ice around his heart crack. Not break, not yet, but fracture enough that warmth started seeping through. She understood. Finally, after 3 months of consequences, Victoria understood. The question was whether understanding was enough, whether it changed anything, whether he could trust someone who'd only learned to see him after he'd stripped away her illusions. He read the letter a 4th time, then carefully folded it and put it back in the envelope. Then he pulled out his phone and typed a message to Daniel. I need you to arrange something. Tomorrow. The coffee shop where Victoria and I met. Morningside Brew. 10 a.m. Tell her I'll be there if she wants to talk. The response came immediately. Are you sure about this, boss? Marcus stared at his phone, at the question that deserved an honest answer. He wasn't sure. He was terrified. Victoria had hurt him worse than anyone in his life, had proven that the thing he'd feared most, being loved for his money instead of himself, was exactly what would have happened if he'd revealed the truth sooner. But the letter in his hand, the raw honesty in her words, the humility that he knew from experience was hard-won and real, that gave him something close to hope. No, but I need to see her anyway. The coffee shop hadn't changed in 7 years. Same cracked vinyl booths, same scuffed linoleum floors, same smell of burnt espresso and dreams deferred. Marcus arrived at 9:45, claimed the booth in the back corner where they'd sat on their first date, ordered 2 coffees, black for him, caramel latte for her. He remembered her order. He remembered everything. She walked in at exactly 10 o'clock, and Marcus's breath caught. She looked different. Younger somehow, despite the 3 months of stress and consequence. She wore jeans and a simple sweater instead of the designer armor she'd hidden behind. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail instead of styled into corporate perfection. No makeup except a touch of mascara. She looked like the girl he'd married instead of the CEO she'd become. She saw him, froze, her hand still on the door. For a moment, Marcus thought she might run. Then she straightened her spine, crossed the coffee shop, slid into the booth across from him with the careful movements of someone approaching a wild animal. You came. I got your letter. Victoria's eyes were bright with tears she was trying not to shed. I meant every word. I know. Marcus pushed the caramel latte toward her. You look different. Better. I feel different. Like I'm finally myself again instead of whoever Eleanor was trying to create. She wrapped her hands around the cup, absorbing warmth. Thank you for agreeing to meet me. I know you don't owe me anything. I owe you honesty. I should have told you about the money, about Titan. I should have trusted you instead of testing you. I failed the test anyway. Because I designed it for you to fail. I told myself I was protecting my heart, making sure you loved me for the right reasons. But really, I was protecting my pride. My father's first wife left him when his business struggled. I spent my whole life terrified of being loved for what I could provide instead of who I actually was. Marcus cupped his hands around his own coffee, mirror image of her gesture. So I hid the truth and waited for you to prove my fears right. And you did, eventually. But I helped push you there. Victoria shook her head. Don't let me off that easy. Yes, you tested me. Yes, you should have been honest. But I made every choice that led to Monday in that boardroom. I chose Eleanor's advice over my own instincts. I chose Richard's flattery over your loyalty. I chose climbing over character. You didn't make me do any of that. No, but I watched you do it without trying to stop you, without fighting for us. I just documented your choices and built my revenge. They sat in silence, both holding coffee, both holding pieces of a marriage that had shattered in the Titan Holdings boardroom. The coffee shop buzzed around them, students cramming for exams, freelancers clicking on laptops, life continuing oblivious to the small tragedy unfolding in the corner booth. Finally, Victoria spoke. Can I ask you something? Did you ever really love me? Or was I always just an experiment? Marcus had known the question was coming, had rehearsed answers in his head, but sitting across from her now, seeing the girl he'd fallen for visible again beneath the rubble of who she'd tried to become, only truth felt possible. I loved you more than I've ever loved anyone. That's why it hurt so much when you started pulling away. That's why I tested instead of trusted. Because I was terrified of losing you, and I thought if I could prove you loved me without the money, I'd never have to be afraid again. And now? Now I'm not sure what I feel. I'm angry. I'm hurt. He stopped, searching for words adequate to the complicated tangle in his chest. I'm still in love with the memory of who you were. I don't know if I can love who you became, and I don't know yet who you're going to be now that Eleanor and the corner office are gone. Victoria nodded slowly, accepting the honesty even though it clearly hurt. That's fair. More than fair. For what it's worth, I don't know who I'm going to be either. I'm still figuring it out. Patricia offered me a promotion to Director of Market Analysis, $120,000 a year, direct reports, real responsibility. She said I'd earned it with 3 months of good work. That's great. You deserve it. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just less incompetent than I was when Eleanor was whispering in my ear. She smiled without humor. Either way, I'm going to take the job. Try to rebuild a career based on actual merit instead of manipulation. See if I can be someone worth respecting. You were always worth respecting, Victoria. You just forgot that somewhere along the way. The words hung between them, carrying weight they both felt. Marcus reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close enough that the gesture was clear. I forgave you. Somewhere between your letter and this moment, I forgave you. Hope flared in her eyes, bright and desperate. Does that mean... Is there any chance we could try again? Marcus pulled his hand back, the question cutting through the tentative warmth he'd been feeling. I don't know. Forgiveness doesn't mean trust. You hurt me, Victoria. You looked at me every day for months and decided I wasn't enough. That's not something I can just forget. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking for a chance to show you I've changed, that I learned, that I can be someone who sees your worth without needing to lose everything first. And what if you haven't changed? What if you're just grateful right now, in this moment, but 6 months from now, when you're Director of Market Analysis and your career is back on track, you start looking at me like I'm holding you back again? The accusation landed hard. Victoria's face crumpled, but she didn't look away. I can't promise that won't happen. I can't promise I won't make mistakes or have moments where old patterns resurface. But I can promise I'll fight them. I can promise I'll remember this conversation, this moment, how much losing you cost. I can promise to choose you every day instead of taking you for granted. Marcus wanted to believe her, the part of him that had loved her for 7 years, that had married her in a courthouse and built her furniture and pretended to be a janitor just to see if she'd love him anyway. That part wanted to reach across the table and say yes. Yes to second chances. Yes to forgiveness that came with trust attached. Yes to rebuilding what they'd broken together. But the part of him that had watched her transformation into someone he didn't recognize, that had been told to use the service elevator, that had been dismissed as dead weight holding back her trajectory, that part was still bleeding. I need time. The admission felt like failure and wisdom simultaneously. I need to see who you become without me pushing or testing or manipulating. I need to know that the woman writing that letter, the woman sitting across from me right now, is real and sustainable, not just a response to consequences. Victoria's face fell, but she nodded. How much time? I don't know. Months, maybe? A year? However long it takes for me to believe that you love me because of who I am, not in spite of it. And however long it takes for you to prove you've actually changed, not just learned what I want to hear. That's fair. Her voice shook, but she held his gaze. Can I write to you? While you're taking time? Not asking for anything, just telling you how I'm doing. Showing you who I'm becoming. Marcus considered. Letters were safer than conversations, allowed for distance and reflection. They'd give him space to process without the weight of her physical presence, her tears, the memories of who they'd been together. You can write. I can't promise I'll respond, but I'll read them. That's enough. Victoria stood, gathering her coat, her movements slow like she was trying to memorize this moment. Thank you for meeting me, for reading my letter, for... Her voice broke. For not hating me. I never hated you, Victoria. I just stopped recognizing you. She nodded, turned to leave, then paused. Marcus, one more thing. The bookshelf you built me. The one with our names carved on the back. I look at it every day and remember the man who made it, who made me feel seen and valued and loved. I'm sorry I stopped seeing him back. I'm sorry I forgot how to look. She left before he could respond. Marcus sat alone in the booth, watching her walk away through the coffee shop window, her shoulders straight and her steps steady. She'd grown a spine in the past 3 months, learned to carry consequences instead of avoiding them. The Victoria who'd written that letter, who'd admitted her failures without making excuses, who'd accepted his need for time without begging or manipulating, that Victoria was closer to the woman he'd married than the CEO who'd demanded a divorce. But close wasn't the same as there, and Marcus had learned the hard way that potential and reality were very different things. He pulled out his phone, typed a message to Daniel. Meeting done. She understands. I'm not ready yet. Daniel's response came quickly. That's okay, boss. Ready is something you become, not something you are. Marcus left the coffee shop, stepping out into February cold that bit through his coat. Snow had started falling again, fat flakes that caught in his hair and melted on his skin. He walked instead of calling for the car, letting the cold clear his head, letting the city swallow him into anonymity. Somewhere in Brooklyn, Victoria was probably crying in her studio apartment, holding on to hope that might never materialize into reconciliation. Somewhere in his penthouse, a closet held a waitress uniform that smelled like coffee and memory. Somewhere between those 2 points, Marcus Blake existed in the space between forgiveness and trust, between love and caution, between the marriage that had died and the possibility of something new growing from its ashes. He didn't know if they'd make it, Didn't know if Victoria's transformation was permanent or just a phase born of consequences. Didn't know if he'd ever be able to look at her without seeing the woman who'd told him to use the service elevator. But he knew he'd given her the letter, the meeting, the tentative thread of connection. That was more than he'd thought he could offer 3 months ago. Maybe it would grow into something. Maybe it wouldn't. The only certainty was that both of them had changed in ways that made going back impossible. All they could do was move forward, separately for now, and see if their paths eventually curved back toward each other. Sometimes hope was the richest thing you could have, even when it came with no guarantees attached. Marcus walked home through falling snow, the city lights reflecting off white that would turn to gray by morning, and thought about second chances and whether people could really change or just learned to hide their true natures better. He didn't have answers, just questions and a letter that had cracked something frozen in his chest, and a meeting that had shown him glimmers of the woman he'd loved buried beneath the wreckage of who she'd tried to become. Time would tell the rest, and for now, time was all he could give her.